The Democratic candidate there, Kamala Harris, wrapping up that speech, accompanied by her husband, Doug Emhoff, the vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, and his wife. Let's bring in Annelise Nielsen, who was there. Annelise, give us a sense of the mood in the room after what was a powerful blockbuster address from the candidate, a much anticipated speech.
The mood is absolutely electric. The crowd was going wild. They kept this really short and punchy, and she's really driven home that this is going to be a campaign with momentum. I'm joined by Joe Hockey. Joe, you've been to these conventions before. How do you feel like this compares?
Well, there's huge energy here. You can't discount that. I think there's a sense of relief amongst Democrats that the party is united. There's no doubt, but a couple of things surprised me. First time we've heard at all about climate change was tonight, and it was only fleeting. For 4 days, no one's talked about climate change. The second thing that surprised me is that tonight was the only time where they were reaching out to some important minority groups, Hispanics and veterans and a range of others. It's all about defining Kamala, but at the end of the day, I don't get any sense that there's any new policies and new direction.
And that's one thing we have to think about. Is Kamala actually going to announce any policies in the next few weeks, or is she just going to continue on Joe Biden's history? And I think the interesting thing, too, when we're thinking about how this is all played out, they completely rewrote this in a few weeks. This is all supposed to be about Joe Biden.
Well, that's
He's not
right.
even here.
Well, even the written policy platform for this convention all talks about what President Biden's going to do over the next 4 years. And it has been quite disorganised, but you can't underestimate how important the enthusiasm is here. You can see the energy in the room.
Yeah, I can see
there
the
were huge
drop.
crowds outside that I struggled to get through.
Yeah.
And you know, that's really important for the Democrats. They've won the popular vote in the last 5 of the last 6 US presidential elections. The Democrats have won the popular vote. So what they're trying to do is really energise that popular vote to get out again. It fell apart under Joe Biden. Now they're doing everything they can to talk to their base.
And Kieran, I don't know if you can see the balloons dropping behind us. This is what everyone waits for at these conventions, and it marks the beginning of the campaign. The excitement, enthusiasm for all these delegates, they're all part of the local groups, the Democrat groups that are going to go out and do that groundwork for the campaigns, door knocking, handing out brochures and enrolling people to vote, because like Joe said, these are not jurisdictions where they have compulsory voting. Enthusiasm decides these elections. Tim Walz and his wife Gwen joined Doug and Kamala on the stage, and he gave a really impassioned speech last night as well, really focusing on reproductive rights, which I think is going to be a huge vote winner for the Democrats.
It is a really, look, I think I had low expectations of Tim Walz. I thought it was incredibly powerful. The visuals of his son, in tears, saying that's my dad, it'll have a powerful impact right across America. But again, tonight's the first time they've actually got the schedule right and had the main speaker on at a time when half of America is still awake. It was bizarre last night. And so, the grabs are what matters for social media and everything else. But the bottom line will be we're now getting to the last 10 minutes of the game, and it's still, tied at 15-all. So I think there's a long way to go.
And Kieran, this is just unprecedented in so many ways that Kamala Harris only came in a few weeks ago, that she's not had to go through any primary elections, that she dropped out in the 2020 primaries early on. She's essentially got to this point without campaigning. So, Kieran, I know you've watched many of these campaigns run, and I think we're all going to be watching how she fares in the next few months, where still anything could happen.
Indeed, Annelise, I'm really keen to get your thoughts and Joe Hockey's thoughts on the part of the speech where she took the gloves off. There's a lot of talk about hope and optimism, but really went hard at Donald Trump in a couple of areas, including saying that the autocrats of the world are cheering him on, Annelise. What did you make of that? I'm keen to hear what Joe thinks of it too.
No, it's a really good point, Kieran, talking about how the gloves have really come off in these speeches compared to, I mean, it wasn't that long ago Michelle Obama was saying when they go low, we go high. Everyone was going low this time. There were some really below-the-belt jokes about J.D. Vance, but she made that real point about talking about foreign adversaries celebrating Donald Trump, that he was the candidate that's going to get rid of funding for Ukraine. And I thought that was interesting because that was her veering into foreign policy, which has not been her strong suit so far. We saw her talking in Munich, being really panned for her comments on global security. What did you think, Joe, about how Kamala Harris really took the gloves off going after Donald Trump?
Well, I was surprised. I mean, I suppose she's trying to prove her mettle, and she's still trying to define herself. So that's why so much of her speech was about who she is and where she's come from and family and so on. But at the end of the day, I keep putting on the hat of what would, a middle American in a Midwestern town be thinking about the messaging. They have enormous messaging from all these prominent Democrats, but at the end of the day, it's their cost of living and immigration that really matters to them, and there's been nothing to allay their concerns. So even today, speaking to a cab driver, he was talking about the fact that south of Chicago is a no-go zone for him. And he was an African-American cab driver. He said, I'm sick of all the neighbourhoods being a mess and no one's doing anything about it. And I pushed him, and he said, yeah, I'm a Trump voter, and I've always been a Democrat. So I think there's still the issues that will hold the vote.
So you talked to a lot of Republicans. If you were talking to Republicans about what they've watched the last few days here, what would your advice be to them to hit these guys where it hurts?
Stick to the issues. Talk about Kamala being a carbon copy of Joe Biden, and there's nothing at all about cost of living, about immigration, about all the issues that matter to people, national security. There's nothing there yet, and I think they can legitimately say it's a vacuous campaign. And I think Kamala's got to have something of substance. She's got to have a shock and awe policy that is different to Joe Biden, and everyone is going to agree is what America really wants. And I just think the cupboard's bare at the moment.
I think essentially their policy right now is we're just not going to be Donald Trump, and they think that's
right.
going to get them over the line.
And you know what? Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing about Donald Trump that could surprise anyone in America or anyone in the world.
No. You never know. And look, Kieran, there's still three unknowns we have here. We don't know what RFK Jr. is going to do. That could completely reshape the race if he goes over to Trump. We don't know what's going to happen with Trump's sentencing. And we don't know how Kamala Harris and Trump are going to go in the debate, because debates are one of those things that cut through to ordinary Americans. They see the clips, it gets made fun of on late night TV, it has that traction. Obviously, we saw Joe Biden's campaign died that night at the debate. So, Kieran, I don't know what your thoughts are on this about where we could go from here. This has been such an unprecedented campaign.
Well, Annelise, just to pick up on that point, this is probably the last massive choreographed event that she can do now without going into some of those news conferences and interviews. Surely now this is the turning point, Annelise, where Kamala Harris does engage in more of that traditional involvement with the news media, because up until now it's been very cautious. It's been a choreographed, that's the word, isn't it, campaign to this point, and culminating with this massive set piece tonight, this much anticipated speech in Chicago.
And look, Kamala Harris gave a really good speech. It really hit a lot of points that her audience cares about. But you're absolutely right, she's not doing media. Kamala Harris hasn't done a press conference. She hasn't done a sit-down interview since she took over the ticket. She's answered a few questions to journalists on the sidelines of getting on and off a bus and getting on and off a plane. Joe, do you think that's a strategy that can last, that she just avoids media?
Well, it will only last if Donald Trump keeps talking about himself instead of talking about the issues that matter. If he gets it onto a debate about the things that are going to matter to everyday Americans, then Kamala needs to respond. Kamala Harris needs to have a plan. There's no plan at the moment. And, I've been through so many campaigns where the federal director, state director, everyone says to you, what is your plan? There is no Democratic Party plan at the moment, none. And at least Donald Trump says, I'm going to reduce taxes. I'm going to build the wall. I'm going to stand up to X, Y, and Z. I'm going to make sure NATO pays its way. I'm going to let it rip on energy. There's a multitude of policies he has. Most of them rehashed from his own turn, so there's not great innovation.
Well, then at least you know he's consistent.
Exactly. He's consistent.
Yeah.
But people know what his policies are.
Yeah.
And I think the problem here is they don't know what the Democratic Party's policies are going forward.
Do you think January 6th is still hurting them, or do you think people have moved on?
I don't know. I mean, look, I don't think it's a fight about the undecided voters, maybe 1 or 2%,
sacrifice
very
and
small
resolve
margin.
To bring a better.
The pollsters say they've gone back to the Democratic Party. I'm not so sure. I mean, I think it's a soft movement. Kamala Harris will get I think probably a 5% jump out of this convention. But as you mentioned a little bit earlier, with Kennedy announcing tomorrow that he's siding with Trump, if that's what really happens, he is currently polling 5%. And the question will be how many of those will go to Trump? And will he actively campaign for Trump? So there's going to be a number of events over the next 75 days that are going to reshape the election. I still think it's far too close to call.
And Kieran, I think that does surprise a lot of Australians, and I still talk to them that they think it's so far one way or the other. And I tend to agree with Joe. It is very close still, and a lot could shift in the margins, and many of the polls we're talking about are still within the margin of error.
Annelise, Nielsen, Joe Hockey live from the Democratic Convention. An historic evening there in Chicago. Thank you both. Appreciate it.